All right, everyone, welcome. This is David. Welcome to another edition of the forecast contest. It's today's Feb 4th. I should get on the right date. Feb 4th, and we're forecasting for Feb 19th through Feb 23rd. Before we get into today's forecast, I'm going to turn it over to Zach. And Zach is going to walk you through the Maxar website and kind of show you some of the tools, resources, and different features and whatnot that's available there. And I should say, once I turn it over to Zach here, especially new folks to the contest, please feel free to jump in if there's anything in particular you want us to cover, or if there's anything that we forget to cover. All right, turn it over to Zach now.
Do you let me share the screen?
Sure. Share it there. Click up there. Stop.
You're still sharing.
Oh, stop. Sorry. There you go.
All right. So, hi, everybody. I'm going to be talking today about the Maxar website. I know this is mostly centered towards our new Missouri contestants. I don't know how many of you are on the line, but if anything, you can just watch the screen recording. We'll upload to the website afterwards. So yeah, just kind of a quick overview, I'd say. First off, for anyone who doesn't know what we're going to be forecasting and what we have been forecasting, Dave brought this up earlier. We're forecasting something called an HDD. It's called a heating degree day. It's basically an analog for temperature. And rather than forecast temperature, we decided as a forecast contest team to pick a metric that's more geared towards industry, who is supplying us with all this information. So we're gearing our forecast contest to what the demand is. Basically, a heating degree day is the benchmark temperature is like 65 degrees. So if your temperature is, let's say, 45 degrees, then your heating degree day would be 20 because you're 20 degrees less than that 65 degree mark. And similarly, during the spring and summertime, when that number is, let's say, 85, your cooling degree day, a CDD, would be 20 degrees in the other direction because it's warmer than that 65 degree benchmark. And the metrics we're using are geared to the national scale. So these values that we forecast are for the entire country, and they're also geared towards the population centers. So places like New York City, Boston, Atlanta, Chicago, all those places, whatever values, whatever temperatures those cities are experiencing, have more weight on this singular HDD value than, let's say, some other smaller cities across the country. So that's just kind of a brief overview of what we're forecasting. Again, we're kind of gearing it towards what the industry demand is right now. So turning to this Maxar website, there's a lot of information here. It can be a little bit tough to digest, so we'll go slow. The first thing I wanted to point out, so if you have a Maxar account, you log in, and you're going to come up on a screen. I think that looks like this. So you can come up to products and go through all of these. So first we're going to click on Dynacast. And basically this tool is pretty cool in terms of you can basically pick any block of time. I mean, for instance, in our forecast contest, we do periods of 5 days. So when we're looking at this website, we're picking those 5-day periods. But let's just say, for example, we go back to the forecast contest page. The most recent verification was for January 29th to February 2nd. So we can come in here, we can adjust our date range. We have our average temperature departures as our parameter. If you come and click this tab, you can see there's all different sorts of metrics you can use, and you can also adjust the region you're looking at. Right now, we'll just stick with the US, Canada. And if we adjust the date and then click Build Map, this should come up. So this is the most recent verification for our forecast contest, and as we'll go into a little bit later, it was a rough one for basically everybody. As we can see, we scroll down, we can see the color bar. Basically everywhere was above normal warmth, except for some small regions in Texas, southern Georgia, and in Florida. So this tool can help you look at like most recent verifications, but also if we're looking at the forecast contests, forecast for today, we can also adjust it and look at just past temperature ranges. So February 19th to 23rd. Similar idea, keep the temperature departures, keep for the US. Back to 2020 build map. And basically this is a composite over the last 30 years. This is basically the 30-year normal for the entire US. You can see it's very strong cold in much of the western half of the country, some pretty strong warmth in the southeast, and then a mix up in the northeast. So again, this tool is pretty cool in terms of adjusting date range. You can define some analogs down here, some teleconnections, MJO, things like that. So we can look at what the temperature patterns across the US looked like based on a certain analog. So that's a pretty useful tool. And I think I'll just bring it up while we're talking about it. This website is where we get our data for Dave's forecast notes. There's a link to this in every single weekly email. Basically, Dave provided this information and it takes in, so again, for this forecast week, it was the 19th to 23rd. We plug in all this data and out pops 30-year average, a 10-year average, a 70-year average, all different sorts of sigma values, some cold average, stuff like that. So this tool is also there, and this kind of is a localized small version of this Dynacast page. So again, that's in the weekly email data provided by Maxar. So if we come back to other things we can look at, so for example, we can go to the PDF reports tab, and this provides the, is it weekly?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
It's daily.
Yeah, they do it. Yeah, Monday through Friday.
Monday through Friday. So this is the energy, the 16 to 20 day energy report provided by Maxar. You can look at today's version. You can look at previous versions. I'm not sure how far back they go. I know, for example, I could look back at sometime early in July, but I don't know how far back you can go.
You click on it.
Only to 2019. All right. But anyway, this, if you click the view tab, we can see that for today, here's the Maxar forecast, their discussion, their pattern configuration, and they do provide an ECMWF weekly model output and a CFS weekly model output. We can see these are the values that they provide down here. Their forecast is right here, so this 127.86, and then they provide the spreads and the mean values for the models. So every week when you make a forecast, you can come on to the Maxar page, look at this forecast discussion, kind of get an idea about what a certain group in the industry is saying. Again, you can look at their forecast reasoning and if you agree or disagree. And then, like I said, you can look at their pattern. And this is pretty useful in terms of getting an idea how to make your forecast, but you can also go back in time and look at this page and see what the pattern looked like compared to what actually happened. And that's pretty cool. And then obviously, if it hasn't been said before, this is data that's given to us with trust involved in it. So please don't share any of this information outside of the forecast contests. We'd have to pay. Yeah, this information is worth a lot of money. So finally, if we come back to the page one more time, we can go to this models section. And this is probably the most useful and complex tool on the website. We have basically 8 tabs or so with all sorts of data that you can look at. On this page, for example, you can look at ECMWF data, Canadian ensemble, GFS ensemble, ECMWF operational, all sorts of things like that. You can adjust forecast hours, regions of interest, the days, what metric you're looking at. Where's the one you look at? Which page is it that has all the individual little data points?
Oh yeah, WDD.
WDD. So this shows, this is how it's progressing so far.
Right. So it's effectively like days 1 through 15. Day 1 being February 4th, day 2 being February 5th, and
Okay.
downward. And then going across, they have the most recent model runs, well, including the the Maxar forecast, MDAF.
Yep.
And then after that, it's the most recent to the older forecast. In this case, you're looking at what forecast are you looking at? The EC? Or it's a little bit above.
GFS.
GFS, yeah. So you can, which is really nice. So for example, you can see the 12Z GFS, which I think is still coming in, right? You can see how it's still coming in because they don't have data below February 10th.
Yeah, I'm
But
pretty
if
sure
you-
this value just popped up as we were
it just
looking at.
popped up, right? So it's dynamic, and it's nice because, especially in the industry, you can just go across and see how the forecast for that, like Feb 10th, has evolved. So that Feb 10th is what, 24.94. Yesterday's 60 showed it at 25, 25, and so on. So you can see if the forecast is coming in colder and warmer, et cetera.
Yeah. And then as with pretty much all of this data, you can adjust the region of interest. Right now it's set on the United States, which is what we're primarily interested in. You can adjust the models and things like that. So, just looking at this at face value, I see a little bit of blue values in approaching our time of interest for this week's forecast. So there's a potential that we could talk about that later on.
Oh yeah, I was just Mr. Rankin mentioned this is a good feature. If you click on the 12-hour change, what it does is it shows the 12-hour change. So instead of you having to try to calculate it, the 12-hour change for the model run. And the reason why that is there is because in the industry, there's a lot of attention to how the model's evolving or changing. And in particular, the 12-hour change. So in other words, the 12Z minus the 0Z is, I don't know if there's any particular science behind it, but folks tend to look at the 12Z minus the 0Z or 0 minus 12 as opposed to the 6Z and 18Z runs. So that's why they have it there, so you can actually see exactly if it's coming in warmer, it's in red or negative, and if it's coming in colder, colder HDDs, it's blue. That's all there for you too. Which is nice.
Let's see, what else? I like to use this page, for example. So basically, when I was making my forecast this morning, this also, again, basically a model data from the EC CFS. You can create different types of composites and look at the different time windows. So for example, we're looking at the 16 to 20. So I was looking at Monday's run of the ECMWF. I was looking at 500 millibar height departures, which is pretty nice about this feature. You can look at upper level patterns as well as lower level patterns that we can see in the 16 to 20. This is a composite of what they're looking at. So I see a lot of warmth in this forecast, kind of what we've been seeing basically the entire year so far. And you can do the same thing for the CFS. You can look at, and see, looks like pretty strong warmth in the CFS as well. So you can watch as it progresses. You can see what was going on before the period of interest. You can look all the way out to 45 days. And as I've said multiple times, there's a lot of information here, a lot of things you can fool around with. I don't think have you used this one before, Teleconnections?
I don't use that one too much, but certainly, yeah, you can, I guess, click on the AO there and see what the model forecast of the different teleconnections are. Yeah. So that's a GFS operational.
Gotcha.
AO.
Yeah, and as Michael pointed out right before we started, the AO is incredibly positive right now. It's approaching that 6 sigma value. So that's certainly something we can talk about in a little bit. Is there anything else? Any other main tools? I think we've kind of covered the ones you and I use.
Yeah, I mean, we could spend an hour on this thing. We definitely encourage you guys to kind of go through this. There's so much good stuff here, really, in terms of even just the different parameters that they have on the composites and overview page. But yeah, maybe we can open it up for question. And the verification, I definitely encourage you guys to look at some of the verification. Unfortunately, I don't think they have it for the 16 to 20, but thankfully we have some of those metrics. But they do have some nice, I think, correlation type metrics in the verification page, which you guys can find useful too. But does anyone have any particular questions or things that they'd like us to kind of go through?
Yeah, Joe, if you just want to type in your questions, I know you said you're dealing with some flu symptoms right now, so you can just type in anything that you want if you have anything. And yeah, you noted that the last time the AO was above 5 sigma was back in early March 2015. So this is a pretty significant event. It hasn't happened in quite a long time, so thanks for pointing that out for us. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, give students a good rundown. Max brought up Heather 10 years. Better. All right. Well, if nobody else has any other questions, like I said, if you weren't able to attend the forecast discussion, please feel free to watch it afterwards. Check out what we talked about. And if there are any other questions, feel free to email Dave or myself, and we can definitely help you out there.
Yeah, and actually, I'll just say one last thing about this. I definitely encourage you to also look at the reports. You know, Zach gave you an example of some of the reports. Having access to that is really awesome too, because it really shows you what the market is looking at and where the science is, right? Maxar is one of the leading groups in commodities, weather commodities, right? So when you read the reports and you see what they're talking about, whether it's, you know, even whether you agree or disagree, but they're talking about the angular momentum, or they're talking about a certain model and how they're weighting it and different things like that, it really gives you a barometer of what the market's doing, the research, the forecasting, you know, the level, and, you know, it gives you an idea of what you need to do in order to, you know, potentially compete, work with companies like that. So I just definitely encourage you guys, who's ever interested in potentially getting a job or in a career like that, you know, try to, while you have access to this and while they're giving us free access to this, take advantage of it. You know, those reports, I think, are made available Monday through Friday. So, you know, you don't have to look at it every day, but it's definitely something I think provides a lot of value.
All right, let's move on to the actual discussion for today. I'm going to start off with some forecast attribution, talk about this week. It was a rough one, as basically the whole year has been so far. So let's go to the the most recent verification was for the window of January 29th to February 2nd. We made it on the 14th of January. This was our second forecast of the new year after our winter break hiatus. If we come to the CRPS scores, we can see that we had one human forecaster do better than the 30-year normal, hence his slightly positive CRPS score. Yeah, verification came in at 121.7. So even though Dr. Roundy at the University at Albany had a positive CRPS score, he was still off by 26 HDDs. Thing I noticed, wanted to discuss, was that, so we took a week off around Christmas, and then we took a week off around New Year's, and then we've had 2 verified forecasts since. And basically all of them have been warm, and, you know, anywhere between 20 to 30 HDDs warmer than all of our verified forecasts. So it's been a really warm start to the year. And based on the models and everyone's metrics, I don't really think anybody was expecting it. We can go into detail in a little bit about why we think that is, but I know for a fact that having basically 5 or 6 straight warm verifications certainly allowed some bias to start creeping in when I was making my forecast today. So if we come back to the map, and I kind of previewed this a couple minutes ago. But this was the verification for our period. We can see basically anomalous warmth across basically the entire country. This is probably I can't remember what last week was, but I think this looks like the warmest it's been recently.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you agree or not, Dave, or if you remember what last week or the couple weeks before that looked like, but this was pretty warm. I thought we could go back and look. This was Maxar's forecast report from the 14th. We can see this was their map. Basically the complete opposite of what actually happened. We can go back and look. Maxar did have a pretty cold forecast and had a pretty low score.
And Zach, just to answer your question, on the Maxar site, you can also, on the Dynacast, you could look at how the years are ranked or the periods are ranked. So I just pulled up that January 29th, Feb 2nd, and it looks like it's about the 7th warmest, 3rd, 4th, or maybe the 8th warmest since 1950. So I think we had a week or two that was the second warm. It might even been the first warmest. So this is definitely, relatively speaking, it's definitely a very warm period. But I think we may have had a week or two that was even
a little warmer
compared
to this
relative
history.
to normal. Yeah.
Going back to this, we can see the weekly models for the CFS and the EC both had a lot of cold, especially the CFS, which is why if we come back to here, we see that CFS was forecasting 198, was off by 70 and got absolutely killed in the CRPS department. And the EC did not fare much better, though, comparatively about half the CRPS score. And then if we come back over, we can look at the CPC. I know, for example, Dr. Decker uses this as his primary metric. We can see that basically the CPC had a lot of cold across much of the country as well. So, basically the EC, the CFS, Maxar, CPC, everybody was kind of missing whatever actually happens. And when, we're all trying to factor in forecast metrics, we're going to turn to these. We're obviously led to believe something completely different. And I can come back here and we can look at the past 30 days. We can see how we've all been doing recently. CFS is doing the worst. Dave pointed out before the meeting started, it has an average bias over the last 3 days of 54.5 HCDs. Makes sense. It's been doing quite poorly. Maxar is a pretty strong bias. You see, we all have strong biases, basically. The only one who, Dr. Decker has a low bias, but only 2 forecasts. Dr. Roundy, pretty low bias, but only 2 forecasts. So it's been a rough start to the year for pretty much everybody. So I guess I can kind of open it up. Been talking for a little bit now. Does anybody have any thoughts about what they thought was going on? We can look at any of the reports that I pulled up, any of the diagrams. We can just talk about what we saw. Anyone have any thoughts?
So I know from my forecast, I had to look at it just to make sure, but for this one, I noticed there was no teleconnection support. So all of the, like the AO, EPO, NAO, maybe even the PNA, but I don't remember about that one, but none of them had any support for the cold solution the CPC was going with. So I think this was the forecast where the MJO was predicted to continue into phase 8, and then just kind of, but as we know, it just kind of died in phase 7 and decided to go back to phase 4 or 5 or whatever.
Yeah, and I definitely don't want to hide in. Well, I do want to hide in a corner on this one because I specifically remember. I don't think Nat Johnson's on the line here, but this was the forecast, right? Where Nat and I were talking about, right? We were right. The MJO was initialized near phase 5 and 6, and it was in the midst of a big circuit. There was some projection at the time, I remember this, that it was going to weaken, by day 15. But, you can see based on my forecast that my expectation was, if anything, that the MJO was going to add some oomph, cold oomph, that is, to the forecast. And I felt pretty good at the time that the forecast was going to be cold. I think again, full disclosure, I think we were even talking about, to give them credit, the risk pulse forecast at the time, and they were warmer and suggesting that, it's too warm, basically, based on the model data and based on some of the analytics associated with the MJO. So, now playing Monday morning quarterback, yeah, it's certainly not obvious to me. It's always tempting when you see something like this. Maybe the MJO weakened more quickly than expected. But, one of the arguments that Nat and I were making at the time was that there's a lag, right, between tropical forcing and the response in the extratropics. So even if there was going to be some weakening in phase 7 and 8, but by that point, you've already had some impact, and the expectation was impact to a colder pattern by that point. So I'm not certain that that's the cause. And it does seem like maybe I think Jason Lynn talked about this last week too. I don't think he's on the line now, but maybe there's been more of a disconnect between what, some of the things going on in the tropical oceans and the extratropics, maybe more than some other years. I'm just throwing things out there. I don't feel like I know the answer. I'm just trying to grasp it. Trying to understand, because I think, one of the big things, Zach and I were talking about this before, this is not a one-off, right? This forecast, the CFS off by, whatever it was, 60 HDDs. It's one thing if it's a one-off. Then you could attribute it to maybe, just randomness or a bad synoptic event. This goes back about 5 weeks for the CFS. It was, I think, the week of Christmas or before, right around Christmas, where it was also off by like 70 HDDs. And then since that point, looking at the past 5 weeks, the summary that, if you look at the 30-day summary, over the last 5 weeks, it's been on average off by like 50 HDDs. So there's something, where is it? The CFS, 54 over 5 forecasts, right? So my question is, like, what's systematically here? Right, systematically, what's gone on since December that the models, in particular the CFS, but the EC too, what are they missing? Like, why is this pattern so much more challenging for the dynamic guidance than maybe in other situations in other years?
Yeah, I don't really have an answer for you on that, but one thing I'll throw out as a possibility is looking at the CFS MJO forecast. It's not as robust into phases 5 and 6, and kind of just reemerges as an actual in phase 7 more so than phases 5 and 6, like most of the other models have. Like the EC takes it, it's still a weaker wave, but it's in phases 5 and 6. Instead of the CFS, which takes it to phase 7. Now, I don't think that would account for the whole thing. If you're looking for it, you have to go back up. It's the operational real-time dynamical model MJO forecasts. Right, a little lower.
A little lower.
Yeah, it's those 3 blue things you've clicked. It's the thing that looks like it's been clicked on before. No, a little higher, Yeah, that one. I use this sometimes if I want to see if there's any consistency in the forecast. There usually is not. But yeah, so there's a pretty decent difference. The CFS doesn't look like it's as robust in the warmer phases. Granted, phase 7 isn't the coldest phase, but I don't know. I think that might have a little bit to do with it. But I don't think it's the the whole thing.
And we did see it in the chat window. Mr. Rankin mentioned the EPO forecast not verifying well, and that seems to me, yeah, maybe that's again connected with the tropical forcing that typically, right, when you see MJO kind of move into 6, 7, and 8, the cold response, at least in part, is due to the building of heights, around Alaska, the EPO. I think there's a good correlation there, and it seems like that failed. So it seemed like, yeah, the models. I'm putting some pieces together here. So this may not be exactly what Mr. Rankin was thinking, but if there is a disconnect between the tropical forcing and the extratropics, and the models didn't resolve it well, maybe that's in part what was going on. They were projecting a stronger EPO response due to the MJO or due to something, didn't come to fruition, and because that failed, the cold also failed to get delivered. So
Something else I'll toss in there too about the teleconnections in general is I don't think the NAO or AO forecasts have been particularly good either this year. Because I remember they were always showing negative NAO on the way, and then you get there, lo and behold, it's positive or neutral.
Yeah, we can look at that. Zach's pulling it up right now. Here's the AO. I thought we looked at this last week, and well, I guess yeah, maybe to your point there. There's definitely recently it's hard to use the AO recently or some of those recent forecasts to justify the problems in the models. Like if you go to that bottom plot, the day 14, since what, January 15th, the forecast, that's not bad, right? Since Jan 16th, but certainly that there was that period, in early and mid Jan where, yeah, definitely it verified much higher, much more positive than projected, right?
Yeah. NAO looks like it same period has been consistently on the upper end of the forecast spectrum.
Yep.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that is a fair point though, Mike. I mean, there's, in that period in early and mid Jan, right, was when we started to see those big forecasts bust. I think some of the bigger ones, right, because or somewhere around that time, right, where forecasts, really started coming warmer. Because again, this winter didn't start that way, right? I mean, November was pretty cold. It was, as I recall, it was nasty, and just kind of switched into summer.
You were talking about what is where would I pull up what the
EPO?
no, what the forecast for next week is looking like, a couple days out.
Oh, the forecast looking, you mean the Maxwell reports, or?
No, you were talking about how you already knew that next week was looking like it was going to come in warm.
Right. So what I did is I went Dynacast to go to the Dynacast, right? So what Zach's talking about, like kind of cheating, looking a little bit ahead to this is part of what I do for my forecast process, right? You're, kind of looking at how obviously we have last week's verification, but I'm also kind of looking ahead to the verification that's going to come in a few days. Presumably that's not going to change too much. So we know that the next forecast, I'm just looking at the chart, is going to come in. Oops. What's this one, right? No, the one after. So Feb 5th to Feb 9th, which is, just a few days from now. So we can type that into Dynacast. Yep. And just hit 2020. Yeah. And when Zach punches this in for 2020, what you'll see here, the map that comes up, will be the Maxar forecast. But again, because it's effectively like a days 2 to 6 forecast, I'm sure there'll be some change, but it probably won't change, too much.
In the data.
Right. And then, he's going to click on the WDD, and then you can see the target where it says target 135.3. that is their current projection for this period. And looking at that period, I'm now looking at our forecast table for Feb 5th, Feb 9th. The highest forecast was the EC at 158. I just sorted it. And the lowest forecast was Maxar, industry number one, 132. So I think Maxar is going to do pretty well with this forecast here. But again, it's going to come in not as badly, not nearly as badly, but it's certainly going to come in on the warmer side of things, right?
Mm. But even then, looks like again, this was only a couple weeks ago. Even then, it's a pretty, the 10-year normal and 30-year normal are right here. We have a couple human forecasters on one side and a couple more most of the human forecasters on the cold side. So again, looks like it could be another tough week.
Yeah, it's definitely, wrong side of normal for most of us. Mike, you've got a good forecast there, or better forecast. And it's interesting too, just thinking ahead a little bit. I remember, I know we'll talk more about this forecast next week, but I remember talking about this one because this was an interesting period. The CFS was warmer, right, than the EC. It was CFS at 144, EC at 158. And I remember us talking about that, the fact that it had been a while since we saw the CFS, warmer than the EC. I mean, just frankly, the week we just talked about, the CFS was super, super cold. So I remember us kind of talking about, what was going on and why the CFS, and, was the CFS onto something here, or was it just even, just out to lunch? Well, it turns out, might be a broken clock, but it's going to do better than EC, it looks like.
My money's on the broken clock.
Yeah, that might be the cause. I remember a couple times in the summer, we had a similar situation where the CFS was just really bad. And then there was like one or two times. And then I remember the following week, we could be like, is this the start of a trend, or, kind of the broken clock? And at least I think when we watched it during the summer, it was definitely the broken clock. I think overall it was really poor. Just one or two. I think what happened is there were 1 or 2 weeks during the summer, maybe 2 or 3, but they were kind of cool, cool-ish. And the CFS got those, but it was more so just because it was basically cool every freaking week, Anyway.
Anybody have any last thoughts? I got about 20 minutes left. I figure we can shift over to forecast for this week. Unless anyone else has anything, we can switch over. Today's the 4th. Forecasting for February 19th, February 23rd. I know not all of us are on, so it looks like we'll only go through a couple of these forecasts. 30-year normal is coming in at 133.3. Maxar is going warm. Basically, a lot of these metrics are going warm. We'll hear what everyone has to say in a minute or two, but I wouldn't be surprised if people's biases are starting to creep in a little bit for how things have been going recently. But I'll start us off. So here I am. I've forecasted a value of 129.8 with the normal spread of 21.6. I kept my same strategy in terms of just trying to weight the different metrics that come out on this page, finding something that works. As we can go back and look at the standings, nothing's really working for me yet, so I haven't found that good metric that works. But going to the past 30 days and just the heating season in general, I did notice that the 30-year moving average is having a pretty strong heating season, even better than the 10-year normal, and which are actually both doing better than the 30-year. So I did factor in the 30-year moving average into my forecast, so it's a blend of the 30-year, 10-year, 30-year moving average, and then the trend forecast, which also did pretty well last week. I found in terms for this forecast, again, just because we've had 6 weeks of above average warmth, I did start to feel that bias creep in where I wanted to go much warmer than everything else. And looking at some of the models and the teleconnections and things like that, I thought that they were showing the chances for a lot of warmth. I mean, we can go to the CPC's website, has most of the East Coast and like the 70% chance of being above normal for temperature. So part of me wanted to bump my sigma down be a higher confidence warm forecast. But I don't think I was necessarily prepared or willing to do that. So I kept it at around 21.6. But I have a pretty good feeling that this is going to be a warm forecast. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I feel your pain. Just to, kind of elaborate on that question, like, yeah, how do you deal, I think kind of what you're saying, I guess there's a question comment here, but, so ultimately, what was your number again?
129.28.
Okay, so ultimately, did you change your formula any to reflect how you felt? In other words, was your formula still very scientific, or did it kind of go a little warmer because of how you felt?
My formula itself, so like the mean value that I forecast, it's just a weighting scheme of the metrics on the chart. It's the spread that I would adjust based on whether I thought it was going to be warm or cold. And I feel like it was going to be warm, and part of me really wanted to bump that number down to like maybe 18 for the spread or something like that. But I have not made a very high confidence forecast yet, so I got a little nervous about making that kind of judgment call.
Okay, so but your mean did not change at all to reflect kind of how you felt, and that sort of was going to be my question, like, and I kind of, you could see my fudge factor, I did put in a fudge factor, literally, -10. And I can't, I guess, what's my question? My question is like, if there is a long-term systematic bias, right? You have at least some sort of objective justification to change. Let's say you're looking at the EC, right? The EC is your only data point. You might have some long-term, you might have some justification to go warm, right? If there's a short-term, let's say there is or isn't, then same thing with the short-term bias correction, like a short-term bias, right? Let's say a 90-day or 30-day or whatever. You again may have some justification. The more difficult thing I feel like that I deal with the 30 or 90 is if you don't fully understand what caused the 30-day bias, then you don't know if it's going to continue, right? And so what do you do in those situations? And it sounds like the answer from you is you didn't, despite the fact if we looked at the 30-day bias of the EC, it was like 30 or 40 HDDs. You didn't just say, all right, I'm going to apply a 30-day or 30 HDD bias correction, right? It sounds like you did not feel like that was compelling enough information to apply to the next forecast. How do you determine that? Like, what, if this goes on for 3 months in a row, at that point, do you apply some sort of short-term bias correction, or at least in your head, like what do you look for to determine how to resolve this kind of situation?
It's a really good question. I try and keep it short-sighted. I try and only forecast a week, week to week, and try and forget what happened the week before. I mean, I do when I do these weighting schemes, I am looking at what metrics are doing well, and part of how they did last week factors into which ones are doing well that I choose based off that. But I don't know. I try and keep it. I try to be short-sighted and not let what happened previously factor in. But we're approaching like a 5-6 week point where it's been warmer than everything that I've forecasted. I don't really know. Again, this is just me forecasting what my thoughts would be down the line if this continues. I don't know, because there's a balance between being short-sighted and noticing a very strong pattern that's been happening for a large enough sample size of like 2 months worth of forecasts. But I think maybe down the line I would start to try and factor in what my bias would be into it. But right now I still think it's in a period where it's short-sighted and something could change.
No problem.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's the. I feel like that's the $1 million question. It's like, do you apply
There's on your assignments.
especially when it's especially when we don't have more data, right? Do you apply that short-term bias correction when you don't know the physical attribution, or do you come in like blank slate? I think there's different views on that, and maybe we can hear from other people, but it's not an easy question.
All right, we got about 15 minutes left. So who would like to go next? I know we don't have all of these people on here. I think it's just Mike, Dave.
I can go next.
Yeah.
Okay, so my forecast was 120.7 HDDs with a spread of 21.6. The 120.7 is significantly below the 30-year normal, which is coming in at 133.3. Formula is the same for this week. Still 60% teleconnections, 30% CPC, 10% 30-year. So looking at the teleconnections, I think it's been alluded to a little bit already by a couple of people. The AO looks to be strongly positive, strongest positive it's been since March 2015. Now it won't be as that positive when we get to this period, but it's still forecast to be positive around that time. NAO is forecast to be positive as always in the winter, it seems. PNA is forecast to be negative, and the EPO, while forecast to be negative, I did raise my forecast a little bit just on the offhand chance that ends up being correct somehow. And I say that as Mr. Rankin says the EPO is verified horrendously this year. So that's taking that now with a grain of salt. The CPC forecast, one of the warmest I've seen, 70% chance of above normal along the East Coast. So that's pretty impressive warm signal to me. So that's how I got to my value of 120.7. Does anyone have any questions for that?
So, Michael, I would assume that similar to the past couple of weeks, the way you get to your 120 through your formula is in part you're kind of biasing the models as a function of the teleconnections. So you're warmer than the models are explicitly because the teleconnections and your interpretation of the teleconnections are a warm signal, and that so that you believe that the models, your concern is that the models, the HDD numbers are more likely than not going to be, too cold.
Yeah, my general formula is I see the forecast numbers from the models like EC and the CFS, but I generally think that they handle, well, not to say that I handle it better, but I think that they handle it poorly, and my approach is to just look at the teleconnections. I guess, like you said, outside of the model forecasts, because I think, like I said, I think they handle them not particularly well, and base a forecast off of that, and the CPC as well.
I guess where that gets a bit challenging too is I was just thinking what Mr. Rankin was saying about, well, the EPO forecast, haven't verified well. I guess if you're if you're looking at the AO forecast, that could be precarious, right? Because what if they don't verify well, but in this case they're too positive, right? They come in much less positive or negative, i.e. colder. On the other hand, maybe what you're saying, I guess this question, if you're basing it more on some of the things you talked about earlier, Mike, which is just overall forecasts have verified much more positive. The AO forecasts have verified much more positive this year. The bias has been to verify more positive, especially in first half of January. Then maybe you're just I guess this is my question, is that kind of more what's driving your view? The fact that, or at least in part what's driving your view, the fact that AO forecasts have tended to verify more positive this year, and that, if that trend continues, then that could also, correlate to warmer temperatures?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can't remember exactly when I started it, but I noticed that the AO and NAO specifically would always verify on the positive end of their spread, at least towards the 15-day period when the spread is, or I guess 14 days is, on the website. When the spread was a little bit more spread out, I guess is the word I'll use. So yeah, that was something I think the past 2 or 3 forecasts that I've implemented, is that I kind of lean towards the more positive side of the spread, because usually it's not like there's one forecast that says, or I guess all the forecasts, since it's an ensemble, are within like half a sigma of each other. Usually they're pretty spread out, and I just kind of lean towards the more positive side of that spectrum. At least for the NAO and AO, the PNA has actually been doing pretty well, I think. And the EPO, I actually didn't know that there was a reforecast, so I didn't have any data on that. So I just kind of, I think subconsciously, I think I went with the same thing, where I just kind of kept it more towards the positive side, even though there isn't really much of a spread forecast over there. But I didn't actually do it consciously, I don't think.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see here. I think.
Professor Decker?
Yeah, Professor Decker, do you want to?
Got a provocative forecast.
Yeah, you got a pretty bold forecast there, so I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so as usual, I went with the CPC. I think that was briefly shown, and Mike mentioned and I also thought that 70% region, I don't remember seeing such a large area of such a high probability of above normal conditions. And since that is located right along some highly populated areas, my interpretation was that above normal area far outweighs the below normal in the Pacific Northwest region. So I'm definitely going way below normal there on the HDDs, and I'm keeping my spread about what the CLIMO is, or at least the 30-year moving average spread, so that if that cold air were to spread a little further south and east into Denver, Kansas City, Minneapolis areas, there's a little bit of a risk there. So I didn't want to be too bold and lower my spread in addition to lowering the mean. But at least based on the CPC forecast, I am going warm for the forecast.
I think that's a good point too, is I think we kind of saw it. What was it? A second to load. It was in the GFS. We could see towards the end of that period a little bit of cold sneaking in, as you alluded might happen, Dr. Decker, and then I think the MWF had not as much. Either way, the GFS had a chance for a little bit of cold towards that period, so it makes sense that you wouldn't pump up your spread too much.
Oh, it's real light.
We only got a couple minutes left, so I think that's everybody. I mean, Dave, you've kind of basically alluded to your forecast already. If you want to just give a brief rundown, if you want to.
The only thing I'd add, other than what I said, is my fudge factor was in part, all the things we talked about, but it was also driven in part by looking at some of the analog, or not analogs, but just composites of previous phase 5, phase 6 events, and I've got the links. Caitlin has a great MJO link that you can find on my archive page if you just click on my thing there. Read more. And you can, looking at what phase, I guess my interpretation is we're going to hang around sort of phase six-ish. And that helps to support the ridging in the southeast. And so that and a little bit of bias. So I guess, to the question I asked Zach earlier, I guess I am actually taking at least a step in that direction. I'm not applying a 30 HDD bias correction, but the fact that my interpretation of the MJO tropical forcing is that it's going to continue in a similar spot, and that it is probably linked. I'm making, there's a lot of probablys, if ands in here, but that it's probably linked to some of the bias that we've seen over the past month. Putting those two things together, that's what contributes to my 10 HDD shift away from my otherwise objective formula. That's basically it for me.
No sooner did I hang up with you, it started to mix with snow. So
I just wanted to show you guys something quickly right before we ended. It's something I made note of in the email. Brand new to the website. So if you come to the Tools tab up the top and click on Forum, we have introduced a new, it is what it is, Forum tab for the website. So basically every week we will put in a topic of conversation for this week's forecast discussion. You can come in, anyone, if you have any questions, comments, anything about the discussion for today. And if we go back, you can even just post your general questions and comments in here as well. So definitely take advantage of that if you have the opportunity to. And like I said, Dave and I will try and keep it updated. If there are questions, we'll try and get them answered. Hopefully we can have some conversations outside the forecast discussion if need be.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, part of this is based on some feedback we've gotten over the past few months, and we just think this will be a better way to log and archive sort of threads than having, 10 emails and stuff. So as Zach said, if you have questions intra-week, at least they won't get lost here. Like, we can make a point of always checking and see if anyone submitted questions. In some cases, hopefully we can, have a conversation during the week, but if not, at least we make sure that we can cover it in our next forecast discussion. And you can insert graphics and things like that too. So it's pretty nimble, pretty easy to use. And so we'll give it a shot and we'll see if it's helpful. If not, we'll think of something else.
All right, well, it's now 12. Unless anyone else has any last thoughts, thank you all for coming. I think we had a pretty productive and just a good meeting overall. So enjoy the rest of your day, everybody, and we'll see you all next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. See you.
Okay.